South Africa is the only African nation to be a member of the G20, and once again, questions are being raised as to whether the continent is sufficiently represented at the G20 summit. Sumitra Nydoo has the story.
While Africa is producing better growth, economies on the continent are still struggling with eradicating poverty, improving healthcare and increasing employment. Issues it's hoped will be in focus again at this week's G20 meeting in Australia. And South Africa, the only African member of the G20, will have to be the voice for the entire continent.
If you look at South Africa's representation internationally and at various multilateral fora, it really has provided South Africa with an opportunity to be the convenient interlocutor for giving a voice toward Africa. But I think it's very difficult to do that when you've got 54 very diverse, very different countries. How do you accurately represent the voices of all of these countries at a multilateral fora like the G20?
While most African economies are growing at an average rate of around 5%, South Africa is lagging way behind. Growth for this year is expected at just 1.4%. Nigeria is now the biggest economy in Africa, but it is yet to earn a seat with the G20 members. Despite a weak economy, South Africa is still the most developed country in Africa. But with a lone voice at the G20, many are questioning whether South Africa is enough to represent the entire continent.
Having more regional representation from within the continent, I think, could be very powerful. The challenges faced by different African countries are really very stark. To try and lump Africa in with the likes of Senegal, Nigeria, Kenya, you're talking about wildly different countries, wildly different economies that have different needs.
Non-member countries can be invited to the G20 meeting. Nigeria, the continent's biggest economy, failed to get an invite.
Well, I think Nigeria's been excluded largely because there's concerns about its governance, about whether it's really stable enough on a political level to back up its economic might and to represent itself at the G20.
It's not clear as to how much attention Africa will receive at the G20, but with the rapid growth of the continent, Africa is hard to ignore.
Countries around the world, including the US, Europe, and also countries from the East, especially in Asia, looking toward Africa. So I think Africa will definitely be a focal point of discussion around the G20. I think the important thing is how countries who have a vested interest in Africa utilize the discussions at the G20 now to put Africa on the map.
South Africa has been tasked with making sure it happens, but has so far failed to get leaders to make any real commitment to improving development on the continent. Sumitra Nydoo, CCTV, Johannesburg.